The last thing my son said before he closed the front door was, "Mom, you'll understand one day." I stood there with my handbag in one hand and the small container of homemade soup in the other. The soup had already gone cold. I had spent most of the morning making it because he used to love it when he was little. Every time he caught a cold, he would ask for the same recipe. He would smile after the first spoonful and say, "Nobody makes it like you, Mom." That day, he did not even take the container from my hands. He simply looked away. Then the door closed, not loudly, not with anger, just quietly. Sometimes a quiet sound hurts more than a shout. I stood on that porch for what felt like forever. The afternoon sun was warm, but I could not feel it anymore. The neighborhood was peaceful. Somewhere down the street, children were laughing as they rode their bicycles. A dog barked in the distance. Life around me carried on as if nothing had happened. But inside me, everything had changed. I slowly turned around and walked toward my old car. Every step felt heavier than the one before. I placed the untouched soup on the passenger seat beside me and rested my hands on the steering wheel. I did not start the engine. Instead, I looked at the front door one last time. I kept hoping it would open again. I hoped my son would run outside and say he had made a mistake. I hoped he would smile the way he used to. I hoped he would call me Mom with the warmth I had heard for almost 30 years. But the door never opened. I drove home in silence. The roads were familiar, yet they felt different that afternoon. Every traffic light seemed longer. Every stop sign gave me another moment to think about the words he had said. "You'll understand one day." I wondered what I was supposed to understand. Was I asking for too much? Had I become a burden without realizing it? Or had my place in his life quietly disappeared long before that afternoon? When I reached home, I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The house welcomed me with silence. It had always been a quiet house, but this silence felt different. It was the kind that reminds you of every empty chair, every untouched picture frame, every room that once held laughter. I placed the soup in the refrigerator. I knew no one else would eat it. Still, I could not bring myself to throw it away. Old habits are difficult to leave behind, especially when those habits are made of love. I sat by the kitchen window with a cup of tea. Outside, the wind gently moved the branches of the old maple tree my son and I had planted together many years ago. He had been 8 years old. He dug the hole with a tiny plastic shovel because he wanted to help. After we finished planting the tree, he looked up at me and asked, "Will this tree grow as big as our family?" I smiled and kissed his forehead. "Yes," I had said, "as long as we take care of it." Back then, I believed love worked the same way. If you gave enough of it, if you cared enough, if you sacrificed enough, your family would always stay close. I was wrong. Love can grow deep roots, but people sometimes choose to walk away from the tree that sheltered them. I wasn't always alone. Years ago, my life looked very different. My husband, Daniel, had a laugh that could fill every corner of this little house. He believed every problem could be solved with patience and kindness. He wasn't a wealthy man, but he made our home feel rich with love. When our son was born, Daniel held him in his arms and whispered, "We'll always protect you." He meant every word. Life, however, had other plans. When our son was only 6 years old, Daniel died after a sudden illness. Everything changed in a matter of weeks. One day, we were planning a family picnic. The next, I was standing beside his grave, holding the small hand of a little boy who could not understand why his father wasn't coming home. That night, my son cried until he fell asleep. After he closed his eyes, I cried even longer. But the next morning, I wiped away my tears. Not because I had stopped hurting, because someone still needed me. From that day forward, I became both mother and father. I worked wherever I could, Some mornings, I cleaned offices before sunrise. In the afternoons, I worked at a neighborhood grocery store. During the holidays, I wrapped gifts at the local shopping center to earn extra money. There were nights when I slept only a few hours, but every morning I packed my son's lunch with a smile. Children notice smiles more than exhaustion. At least, that is what I hoped. I never wanted him to carry the weight of my struggles. If dinner was simple, I told him we were having a special meal. If I skipped buying myself new shoes, I told him I already had my favorite pair. If the electricity bill worried me, I waited until he was asleep before opening the envelope. He deserved a childhood. I could carry the rest. As the years passed, he grew into a kind young man. He studied hard. He opened doors for strangers. He remembered birthdays. Every Mother's Day, he would leave a handwritten card beside my breakfast. One year, he wrote something I still keep folded inside my Bible. It said, "Mom, thank you for giving me two parents in one heart." I must have read those words 100 times. Whenever life became difficult, I took out that little card. It reminded me that every sacrifice had been worth it. Or at least, I believed it had. Then life brought someone new into his world. Her name was Emily. The first time he mentioned her, his voice sounded brighter than I had heard in years. "I think you'd really like her, Mom," I smiled. "Then I can't wait to meet her." And I truly meant it. I had never dreamed of being the kind of mother who tried to control her son's life. I wanted him to find happiness. I wanted someone to love him long after I was gone. When I finally met Emily, she was polite. She smiled. She thanked me for dinner. She complimented the flowers in my garden. Nothing seemed wrong. If anything, I felt relieved. As they prepared for their wedding, I helped however I could. I sewed decorations. I baked desserts. I even sold a few pieces of old jewelry that had belonged to my grandmother so I could quietly help pay for the reception. I never told my son. I didn't want him to feel guilty. A mother's joy often comes from giving without expecting applause. On their wedding day, I watched them exchange their vows. My son looked happier than I had ever seen him. As they walked down the aisle together, he looked back at me. He smiled. For just a moment, I saw the little boy who once held my hand while planting that maple tree. I smiled back. I whispered a prayer that their marriage would be filled with kindness, patience, and love. I believed our family was beginning a beautiful new chapter. I had no idea that little by little, I was about to become a stranger in the life I had spent decades building. And looking back now, I can finally see that the afternoon my son quietly closed the door wasn't the beginning of our story. It was only the moment when my heart finally realized what had been happening all along. Christmas Eve arrived with a quiet stillness. A thin blanket of snow covered my front yard, making everything look softer than it had the day before. I wrapped a warm sweater around my shoulders, made myself a cup of tea, and sat beside the living room window, watching the world wake up. The little gifts I had wrapped weeks earlier were still resting beneath the Christmas tree. One was for my son, one was for Emily. I had almost mailed them instead of keeping them. Something in my heart had told me to wait. Just before 10 o'clock, I heard a knock at the front door. At first, I thought it was one of the neighborhood children collecting donations for the church. When I opened the door, I stopped breathing for a moment. My son was standing there. Snowflakes rested on the shoulders of his dark coat. His eyes were tired, and there were shadows beneath them I had never noticed before. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he quietly said, "Mom, may I come in?" I stepped aside without saying a word. Some invitations don't need to be spoken. They come straight from the heart. We sat at the kitchen table where he had eaten thousands of meals growing up. The room felt smaller than I remembered, but somehow warmer. He looked around slowly. "The house hasn't changed," I smiled gently. I suppose some things don't. He lowered his eyes. I've been thinking a lot. I waited. There are things I should have seen sooner. His voice trembled. I kept telling myself I was just busy, that life was moving fast, that there would always be more time. A tear slipped down his cheek. But I stopped noticing how lonely you must have been. I reached across the table and placed my hand over his. He looked up at me with the same eyes that had once searched the crowd at every school play until they found my face. You never stopped being my mother, he whispered. I just stopped acting like your son. Neither of us spoke for a while. The silence between us was no longer heavy. It was gentle, the kind that allows broken hearts to begin mending. Just then, another knock came at the door. When I opened it, Emily was standing outside, holding a small box of homemade cookies. Her eyes filled with tears before she even spoke. I'm sorry, she said softly. I thought building our own family meant pushing people away. She looked down for a moment before meeting my eyes again. I know now that love doesn't have to be divided. It grows when we make room for one another. I smiled and opened the door a little wider. Come inside. And for the first time in a very long while, it felt as though we all stepped into the same home together. Not just the house, but the family we had nearly forgotten how to be. That Christmas was not perfect. There were still tears. There were still moments of silence when none of us knew quite what to say. But for the first time in a long while, those silences no longer felt like distance. They felt like healing. We spent the afternoon together in the kitchen, preparing dinner just as we used to. Emily insisted on helping with the rolls, laughing when she realized kneading dough was harder than it looked. My son carved the turkey while asking me questions about recipes he had never cared to learn before. It wasn't about the food, it was about being together. At one point, my son disappeared into the living room. When he returned, he was holding the faded blue memory box I had kept in the attic years before. Inside was the birthday card he had written as a little boy. He unfolded it carefully and read the words aloud. Mom, when I grow up, I will always take care of you like you take care of me. His voice broke before he reached the end. I'm sorry I forgot this promise, he said quietly. I stood up and wrapped my arms around him. You found your way back, I whispered. That's what matters. Emily stepped beside us and gently took my hand. From now on, she said, we'll make room for each other. As snow continued to fall outside, we stood together in the warm glow of the Christmas lights, grateful not because our family had never been broken, but because love had given us the courage to mend what pride, silence, and time had nearly taken away. Sometimes the greatest reunion doesn't happen when someone comes home. It happens when hearts open their doors again. A few months have passed since that Christmas. Life did not suddenly become perfect. My son still has work. Emily still has responsibilities. We all have busy days, and sometimes our plans change. But one thing is different now. None of us let silence grow into distance. Every Sunday evening, my phone rings. Sometimes we talk for only 15 minutes. Sometimes they come over for dinner, and we end up talking until the tea grows cold. Those small moments have become the greatest gifts. This spring, my son came over to help me trim the old maple tree we planted together when he was 8 years old. As we stood beneath its wide branches, he looked up and smiled. You were right, Mom, I laughed softly. About what? He rested his hand against the trunk. You said it would grow as big as our family. I looked at the tree, its roots deep in the ground and its branches reaching toward the sky. It did, I said. It just needed a little care. He nodded, understanding that I was talking about more than the tree. Before he left that afternoon, he hugged me tightly. Not because it was a holiday, not because he felt guilty. simply because he wanted to. As I watched his car disappear down the street, I didn't feel the sadness that once filled my heart. I felt peace. If this story has taught me anything, it is this. Love is not measured by grand promises or perfect moments. It is found in the quiet choice to keep showing up, to listen before judging, and to make room for the people who stood beside us when life was hardest. Never wait until someone feels forgotten to remind them they are loved. Because the people who give us the strongest roots are often the very ones who quietly hope we will remember to come home.